Epicor is the essential partner to the world's most essential businesses, offering ERP solutions built for growth and operational success. Explore the industry productivity solutions we curate for the automotive, building supply, distribution, manufacturing, and retail industries by visiting epicor.com/essential. That's epicor.com/essential.
Unless you've been living under a rock, you've probably been hearing a lot about the stock market lately. Millions of people are beginning to invest for the first time ever. And we're realizing that the financial system should be built to work for us. That's why Robinhood is creating real human education resources, truly digestible financial news, and a platform that lets you invest in your own way, on your own terms. The next generation of investors is already here, and it includes you. Robinhood. Investing is risky. Robinhood Financial, LLC.
By the time you get home and, your muscles, heal up and the mosquito bites are gone, you tend to forget the negative and remember the good stuff. And so typically when people say, well, what's your favorite trip? I always say my most recent trip is my favorite trip.
J.R. Harris is incredibly unique for a number of reasons. First of all, he is born and raised in New York City, and for over 50 years has used New York City as a launching pad for his incredibly remote wilderness adventures. I'm talking like the bush of Alaska, the Andes, the Himalayas, places all over the world that people hardly ever go, especially folks from New York. J.R. has been able to live these two lives pretty flawlessly for the last literally over 50 years. He's in his 70s now and still doing adventures and still going to work every day. And speaking of work, he owns and operates the oldest Black-owned marketing, consulting, and research company in the U.S., JRH Marketing Services. And like I said, he's Black, so that's another way that kind of makes him unique because, 50 years ago, doing adventures, especially as someone who was Black from New York City, was just almost unheard of. And in fact, he's going to tell us a story about his very first trip where he, early college, decided to drive to Alaska in the 60s just to see how far he could go. Drove as far as he can down the Alaska highway, well into the Alaskan bush, turned around and came back, had about 35 cents to his name in the 60s as a Black 20-year-old. Pretty remarkable, and the things he's been able to do since are incredible. And if you'd like to learn more, I definitely encourage you to check out his book, Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker, and you can find that at jrinthewilderness.com. And this episode's from a few years ago, so I just wanted to play it again for Throwback Thursday episode this week. We should have him back on again soon, talk about some of his other adventures, talk about some of these maybe in more depth. But before we get to this episode, I wanted to make you aware of one of our sponsors, which is therestorationdepot.com. If you're looking for, a positive, friendly, fun virtual community to be a part of that's always learning new things and has a lot of classes that you can learn from, definitely check out therestorationdepot.com. It's just this online platform that allows you to choose from all these different classes, very affordable, but it teaches you a lot of things like yoga, tai chi. You can learn about essential oils. You can be better at music, different instruments, and so much more. Everything from very active things to more just lessons, learning about things. So if you're interested in learning from some of those classes, go to therestorationdepot.com. And your very first class can be just $5 by selecting First Class Special at checkout. So if you're looking for that active, fun, engaging online community, I definitely encourage you to check that out. Until then, enjoy this episode. All right, everyone. So welcome to today's episode. I hope you had a good weekend, good week. Today we have a really, really interesting guest. I'm super excited to interview him. He's been on over 50 multi-week treks since 1966. That's over 50 years of adventures, and a lot of those have been alone, and they've all been self-supported or unsupported. He's a member of the Explorers Club, lifelong resident of New York City, and he's the founder and the president of JRH Marketing Services, which is the oldest African-American owned research and consulting firm in the U.S. And he's the author of Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker, and his name is J. Robert Harris. Mr. Harris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. Thank you for including me here. I'm really excited to talk to you.
Yeah, man. Thank you for taking the time to do this. This is awesome. You're, I had heard about your book earlier last year, and I hadn't had a chance to read it yet, but I knew immediately, like, man, I'd love to have him on the show at some point. And you say you're coming from New York City today, right?
Yep, New York City, Big Apple.
Oh, man. How's the weather?
Oh, well, not too bad. It's cold, but sun is shining, and I'd say it's pretty good for January.
And so, you're a lifelong resident in New York City, but you are hugely experienced in the outdoors. Why don't you tell us, and you're, like you said, you're a lifelong resident. What's your background? Where are you from? And how did you get introduced to the outdoors?
Well, first of all, when I say I'm a lifelong resident, my family moved here. My parents moved here when I was 1 year old. So I wasn't actually born in New York City, but it's the only place I've ever really known. I've been living here again since I was 1 year old, back when dinosaurs ruled the earth. And grew up here in the city. I was a typical city kid. My family lived in a housing project. My dad was a truck driver. My mother was a homemaker. By the time I got to be a teenager, they were a little concerned about growing up in the projects and city housing. Back in those days, we had gang warfare like we do today, still out there. And my parents were eager to try to get me away from that environment. And so they thought that the way to do it was to sign me up in the Boy Scouts, which, of course, I didn't really want to do. None of my friends were in it, really. Boy Scouts back in the late 50s, early 60s was not, what you wanted to be in if you were growing up in projects. And, so it took a bit of hazing from my friends. But my folks said, well, you're going to go away to summer camp up in the mountains, up in the Catskill Mountains. And, of course, I didn't want to do that either. But once I got there, everything changed. I wasn't used to trees and grass and all the outdoors. I wasn't used to seeing so many stars in the sky at night, so much sky at all during the daytime. They taught us how to use a knife and an axe and how to pitch a tent and how to make a fire in the middle of a thunderstorm and how to track animals and tie knots and all this good stuff. I really went for it. I really, really liked it. And two things happened. Number one, I learned to appreciate the outdoors and to respect nature. And number two, of course, I learned a lot of new skills that I didn't use, when I got back home, but it was a real confidence builder at that stage when I was an early teen. And I went back to scout camp for the next, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years after that, and really enjoyed it. I actually got to look forward to it. And so that's how I got introduced to the outdoors and to trekking and all that good stuff.
Wow. The Boy Scouts. Wow. That is so crazy, man, because it's probably a hard place to have a troop in New York City. And how insightful of your parents to say, you're going to do this, something that's kind of out of the box, probably especially for your friends and the people you were around, just to say, hey, you're going to do this thing that's going to take you so far out of your comfort zone. But man, your parents must have really, that's a very wise decision on their end.
Well, that's what they always said.
Man, I think after 50 years, you'd agree with them, wouldn't you?
I definitely agree. I never would have done it on my own. I don't think I ever would have been exposed to the wilderness or even to the forest, for that matter. Had I not been in the Scouts, I certainly wouldn't have learned a lot of skills that I'd be using for the next 50 years as I went on treks all around the world. So, they made some, that was just one of the many wise decisions my parents made, and probably one of the many wise decisions they made that at first I didn't think was so wise, but I didn't really agree with. It all turned out well, very well.
That is so cool. And so after the Scouts, you says you started your career essentially in 1966. What happened then? What did you do that officially kicked off your adventure career?
Well, 1966 was the year that I graduated from college. I was 20 years old, first one in my family with a college degree or even a high school education.
Oh, congrats. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was cool. And I decided I needed to get away someplace just to get away from the stress I had for 4 years of trying to earn a degree and working at night. And so I had a used Volkswagen, a beat up Volkswagen Beetle. And I looked at a map and I said, what's the northernmost road? Where's the farthest north you can drive in all of North America? And it turned out to be 120 miles north of Fairbanks, Alaska, a town called Circle, Alaska. Back in 1966, you could not drive farther north than that. And so I said to myself, well, if I was to drive all the way up there and drive all the way to the end of that road, I would be the northernmost car in all of North America, Canada, US, Mexico. Every vehicle would be behind me, and there would be no vehicles in front of me from where I was all the way to the North Pole. And for that crazy reason, I jumped in my car and I drove up there. And along the way, when I got into the Yukon Territory, especially, and could see all the mountains and the wilderness in the back, and I really had the urge, the longing to leave my car and be able to go back into those mountains, and see what those valleys were like, those hidden valleys behind the first range of mountains, to see what kind of wildlife was there, to see what it was like just to live there. Of course, back then I had no backpack or anything like that, but I did have all the memories from the Scouts, and I still had some of the skills. And I said, this trip that I'm on right now is really epic, but when I get back home, I'm gonna get myself some new gear, and I'm gonna go back out and start backpacking again. So that's really how the whole thing started. When I finished with the Boy Scouts, I didn't do much hiking after that until I finished college. But once I came back from Alaska, and back in 1966, now Alaska had only been a state for like a couple of years. There's hardly anybody living there.
Wow.
They hadn't discovered any oil there yet. And it was just a big open wilderness. They used to call it the last frontier. And that's pretty much what it was. It's a long drive.
Dang, man. That is, dude, when I was, my first adventure was also in Alaska, starting in Fairbanks, and I was 20 years old as well. And, but I wasn't alone. I was with my best friend, and we were riding bikes. But I'll have to say, man, and I'm from the East Coast too. I'm from Florida, though, the other side. But man, it was terrifying for me at 20 years old. I still had a couple years left. But that was in 2011, man. What about 1966 by yourself?
Think about it.
Man,
think about it.
And I guarantee there was a bunch of gravel road on your way up there too, because it's not even all paved now. That's
right. I did about 2,500 miles from New York City to Dawson Creek. Then I had another 1,523 miles from there to Fairbanks, and none of it was paved. Oh, once you got back to the Alaska border, it was paved. The last 300 miles into Fairbanks was paved. But yeah, there was very few towns back then, very few places to get gasoline. There was no place that you would want to break down in your car because there was no AAA or anybody to come out and get you. I had very little money. I had never been out of the States. My first time in Canada, and I drove all the way across. And it was a real adventure. It was tough, but it was great.
What did people say when you told them, especially like family or people around you, and you said, "I'm going to do this"? Because that sounds crazy.
That's what they told me.
That makes sense.
Well, back then, nobody went to Alaska. Alaska was just a place that was just so far away. You couldn't even envision it. This was a time before there was a Discovery Channel or a National Geographic Channel. The news out of Alaska, you hardly heard anything. It was a place where people who, wanted to run away from civilization went, prospectors and people who were having trouble at home and just wanted to get away. And so it had this kind of really hard scrabble, backcountry, off the grid reputation. And so when I said I wanted to go there, and especially, because I didn't know anybody there and nobody I knew had ever even been there, and I had a used car and very little money. So, my parents were down with it. My dad being a truck driver, he's the one who taught me how to shift, and I had a Volkswagen shift car. So he kind of liked that. And my mother, she was up for it as well. She said she liked that her kids had some kind of adventure, spirit in them. And so they were very supportive. But, some of my friends, some of them thought it was kind of cool, actually, but none of them would want to do it. And a lot of them thought it was just ridiculous, that it was crazy. I must have to give a shameless plug here to say that the first chapter in my book tells this entire story and all of the crazy, hilarious, difficult, exciting things that happened on that trip, because it was definitely an adventure.
And honestly, I know a lot of your trips now are backpacking and trekking and through hiking, but to me, this just seems like this kicked it all off. Not only because it was the first, but because of just how much stinking courage and I mean, it's a complete adventure. It has every ingredient, from not even knowing what Alaska really looked like to being completely alone. And oh man, it just sounds incredible.
Yeah, this was before the internet, before you could get any information about anything. I remember, for example, I didn't know what kind of clothing to bring, but I knew that Alaska was way up north. And so I packed all these winter clothes, even though it was the end of June. I didn't know that Alaska in the summer can get very hot. And so here I had tons of sweaters and scarves and heavy coats and hats and boots that I never even wore, because there was just no way to really check the weather. And so that was my assumption.
That is unbelievable, man. And, that's when I was up there in May, when I started my trip, and it's funny you say that, not knowing what to wear. And we had the internet and everything, but in May in Florida, it's like 100 degrees already. Up there, all I had for warm clothes was my buddy and I played basketball together, so we both had basketball jumpsuits for warm-ups. We wore our warm-up suits, so the long pants and the windbreaker shirt that matched. And that's what we wore out in this. And it was snowing. It was snowing all the way through May until June.
Wow.
And we were so unprepared. So, man, I love this. I love this first trip, how crazy it was. Because that's, oh, my goodness.
Yeah, it was insane.
Time ago, man. That's a tough time to be going somewhere, traveling alone like that. I mean, things weren't really settled in the States.
Yeah, and it's funny you mention that, because what I did is I left New York City and I drove straight up to Canada, up through New York State. And then my idea was to cross the border into Canada and then drive west all the way across Canada to the west and then head north up to Alaska. So when I got to northern New York State and I first crossed the border into Canada, the customs agent there said, how far are you going? And I said, I'm going to Alaska. And the guy didn't believe me. So he thought I was running away from New York, because that was during the Vietnam War. And a lot of people my age, 20 years old, were being drafted into the war, and they were escaping up to Canada so that they wouldn't be drafted. And he thought I was one of them. And I said, no, I'm driving through, but then I'm going to be coming back out in Alaska again. And he said, yeah, okay, right. But, you may have trouble finding a job, you may have trouble finding a place to live up here. I said, no, I'm going all the way through. And he said, yeah, okay. Yeah, buddy, have a good trip.
Jeez, man, what an adventure. That's so awesome. So when you got back, what was that like? What was it like to return to New York City? I'm sure your mind was just mush trying to comprehend everything.
Yeah. You know, I have a photo that was taken of me the day I got back. I'm sitting on the back fender of my car, and I'm holding up in my hand, in each hand, I had a quarter in one hand and a dime in the other hand. I got back home, I had 35 cents left. And actually, I actually still have that very same quarter and dime. I saved it all these years. And I have it not too far from where I'm sitting right here. But yeah, when I got back home, I was a different person. You know, I'd had more experiences in those weeks that I was gone than a lot of other people have in their whole life. You know, it took a while to process it all, because it wasn't until I got back home and then I could sit down and really think about all the things that I've seen, the people that I met, the things that I did, think about, how crazy it was, because it was really an impulse trip. You know, once I decided to go, I probably left a week later. You know, I just threw some stuff in the car and scraped together maybe $150, and that was it. And so when I got back home, it was good, you know, and it actually set a precedent for me, because I sat down. One of the things I did is I sat down and I wrote a journal. I wrote a story about the trip so that I would always remember all the details of what happened, so that years later, I'd be able to look at that journal and bring back all those memories. I also took photos while I was there. But in all the trips that I've taken in the whole 50 plus years since then, I always wrote a journal. And, you know, I said to myself in the old days, yeah, write this journal so you remember all these details. And so that when you get to be an old man, you know, like when you're 50, you know, you could sit in your rocking chair and read all these stories, you know. And then I got to be 50 years old and I was still backpacking. You know, then I got to be 55. Then I got to be 60. Then I got to be 65. Then I got to be 70. You know, I'm still taking trips and still writing journals. But I'm really glad that I started writing those journals, because now when I read them, it not only brings back all of the details of what happened on these trips, but reading it is a reflection of the person I was back in the day, back in 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. I could tell just by what I wrote and how I wrote it, who I was back then. And it's really exciting to not only read about the adventures themselves, but also to reflect on how far I've come since some of those trips back in the day.
Yeah, it's a really good piece of advice, and I endorse that too. It's not easy, you know, at the end of a long day of trekking, but if something interesting happens, or if nothing happens at all, if you can take a few minutes at the end of the day or the end of the week and just write down some things, you'll be so amazed by, you know, what you forget in a pretty short amount of time, and how quickly,
Absolutely.
when you read those words, how quickly it not only reframes those memories and puts them back together, but the things that surrounded it as well that I didn't even write down, like, oh, I remember that. And then because I remember that, I now remember this person that I met. I didn't even write that down, but it brings back so much.
That is absolutely true. That is, you know, it puts you back in the moment back then. And you're so right. Even the stuff that you didn't write down, you begin to remember incidents, people, little details that you didn't think about that much when you were writing the journal. But in retrospect, as you look back, it has more meaning. And I'll actually go back when I read one of these journals, and if I get an insight or a memory of something that isn't in there, I'll actually put it in that journal.
Wow.
Even though I may have written that journal 20, 30 years ago.
That's a great idea.
I'm so happy I did it. You know, the journals are what I used to write the book, although the journals are not, you know, the book is not cut and paste from the journals. Each chapter tells a story. I relied on the journal for the details and for the memories. I looked at the journal, I read the journals, I looked at the photos, and I have the other thing I did is all my topo maps from all my trips. Every campsite that I make, I indicated on a topo map. So you could ask me 25, 30 years ago on a given night where I was, and I could tell you exactly what campsite, exactly where I was, somewhere in the world, camped alongside a lake or in a forest or up in the mountains. So I have all that detail as well.
That's unbelievable, man. That is so cool. Yeah, I haven't gone into that detail, but I do admire that level of discipline because it's so valuable looking back on. I can't recommend it enough. If anyone out there is getting ready to do a trip, please, please, please write it down, record stuff, both, do something to make sure you can look back in a year, in 10 years, in 50 years, to remind yourself the feelings it brings up, man. It's such a good thing to bring perspective and it's just awesome. It's what life's about, man. So
you'd be so happy.
It makes you literally makes you happy. It's awesome. So you do this big trip to Alaska, you get back, you're back in the city. I assume now you got to start working, start with responsibilities.
Right.
But you did everything but stop. You absolutely did not stop going outside and doing trips. So what did that look like from then? What was your next trip? And what did you start building your life like after that?
Well, when I got back home, you're right. I had to get a job. Had to be responsible,
Yeah, you can't live off 35 cents for too long in New York, even in 1966.
I had to get out and get a job. I actually became a taxi driver in New York City. I went and got a taxi license, and I drove a cab at night. I had a lot of jobs back then, but at the same time, I wanted to go back out. I wanted to go back into the backcountry, get away from the city. And so I bought myself some basic gear. I got myself a little tent and a sleeping bag, backpack, and I would start going out, on the weekends, and I would go maybe up in the Catskill Mountains, only like 2.5 hours from here. And then as time went on, I would go, a weekend trip became a long weekend, and then it became a week. And then a week became 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks became 3 weeks, et cetera. And then, the Catskills became the Adirondacks, and then the Adirondacks became the Rocky Mountains, and then the Rockies became the Andes, and then the Alps, and then, it just branched out from there.
And so with work, you made these trips a priority. Now, how often do you do them? Once a year, twice a year? What was your goal, or did it change over time?
Well, fast forward from 1966 to 1975, 9 years later, after I've been working at some pretty good jobs that I got as a researcher in social sciences. I have a degree in psychology. And then in 1975 is when I decided to start my own business. And so I started a market research and consulting firm. At first, it was just me, and I did it with my kid brother, who was just graduating from college. He was 9 years younger than me. And I started out working in my own business. Obviously, the first people in my family ever had their own business. But I made a decision right from the beginning. I'd heard stories about people who went into business on their own, and they did nothing but work day and night, weekends, year in and year out, and they never took a vacation. And when they finally got, to a point where they felt comfortable leaving the business, like 20 years later, and finally taking a vacation, they were sorry that they hadn't done it sooner. And so I made a decision right from the beginning that I wasn't going to do that, that I was going to work really hard, as hard as I could. But every single year I was going to go away and I was going to take at least one trip. I wasn't going to wait, 5 years, 10 years or whatever. And so from the very beginning, I started to, to actually leave the business. My brother could run it fine. And it was great because I could disappear. Back in those days, there was no cell phone. There was no satellite phone. There's no communication. I was totally disconnected from the world for a couple of weeks. But I didn't have to worry about it. I didn't have to call in. I didn't have to wonder what was going on with the business because I knew that my brother was there. And that turned out to be fantastic. I would come home from my trip and then I would be there while he, took off and went wherever he went. Of course, he didn't go in the wilderness. He would go to the south of France and drink martinis or something like that, which is cool. But that's what I wanted to do. And so by 1975, I had some decent gear. I've been on some trips, as I mentioned before, the shorter trips, the weekend trips, the week-long trips. And I could now, because I had a couple of extra dollars in my pocket, I could expand my horizons and start to create, this kind of a bucket list of trips that I wanted to do and start knocking them off. I also traveled a lot for business. My clients were worldwide. They were all over the world. And so I had a lot of frequent flyer miles. So when I did take off on my own, I had, at least free airfare, which was the biggest single expense on these trips, is getting overseas to where you're going and getting back. And so it all actually worked out fine. And I do 1 or 2 trips a year for average maybe 3 weeks, some of them a little shorter, some of them a bit longer. And I've done a trip, I think every single year since then, I've done at least one trip, except for one trip when there was sickness in the family and I didn't go away. So I've got a lot of trips there.
Wow. So are you happy with the formula that you built? Do you wish you'd have done it even more frequent, or was that pretty fulfilling to do it once to twice a year?
No, it was fine doing it once or twice a year. I by this time I also had a family. I had 2 kids. And so, and I do like being in New York City. I love this city. I still do. And so, doing these trips wasn't about trying to getting away from all the hustle and bustle. I mean, it wasn't really that, it was because I actually wanted to go there. But I had a life back here and I liked that life. And so to me, it was a perfect balance, really. I was home when I was home and I was away when I was away. And, I wouldn't change it at all. Now I'm in a couple of months, I'll be 75. I'm still doing these trips. And now I actually have more time. So I'll be doing maybe 2-3 trips a year. And I figure, at this stage, I got maybe another 25, 30 years of trekking that I can do. So it's just really a matter of finding a place to go.
Yeah, you're not going to run out of cool places to go. You've been all over. Man, you've been all over, man. Is it hard to come back to New York City? I mean, those are like you spend a week on, down in Patagonia, and come back to the bustling city. Is that tough for you? Do you ever wish like, dang, I got to get out of this place?
Well, I agree with you. It's I'm living 2 totally different lifestyles.
They couldn't be more different. They
couldn't be more different.
No.
From New York City to, going someplace so remote that you don't see anybody. You literally don't see anybody for a week, 10 days, maybe more. It couldn't be more different. I used to have a bit of an adjustment problem, if you want to call it that, going from one to the other. The initial adjustment was more about when I left home and went away. And it took me, a day or two to get used to carrying a pack and sleeping on the ground and using a map and walking all day and getting rained on and snowed on and just like that. And then after a while, when I got used to that outdoor living and being alone and on these solitary trips, then when I get back to New York, there was kind of an adjustment just because there were just so many people and everything seemed so loud. The traffic was so loud, it seemed like, and everything was moving so quickly. And so even though I grew up here and I was used to it, when you're away for weeks at a time, you settle into that lifestyle. And then when you come back and suddenly, you're thrust back into your other life. But at this stage now, it isn't an adjustment anymore. When I go away, I'm looking forward to being out there. And when I come back, I'm happy that I've been out there and I'm cool with being back home. And so, to be honest with you, I'm living a dream, and I've been living that dream for many, many years. And I'm really grateful for it.
That's an envious life to live, man. I've looked through your pictures on your website, the slideshow that just scrolls post after post, and it's just, man, glorious places, man. Do you have anyone you can relate with back home that you share these experiences with, that you're like, man, I want to do this place? Yeah, I don't know, just some common grounds with some people you're close to, or are you still kind of a black sheep to everybody you know?
Is that a pun? Black sheep? No, never mind.
Oh my goodness. The
thing is, years ago, all my trips were not solo. I had some friends who actually liked backpacking. Not a lot of them. In fact, in my whole life, there may be 9 or 10 people that I've ever been out with. And that was mostly way back then. And it was mostly because it's tough to, you would have to leave your work. You'd have to, if you get 2 or 3 weeks off from your job, did you want to spend it with me, in the middle of nowhere, especially if you had a family?
Right.
Did you want to go through all that expense to go somewhere around the world? Are you in good enough shape? Have you been working out all year long so that you can take a trip like that? And back in the day, every couple of years, there would be somebody who would say, yeah, I'll go. But, eventually life, is different for everybody. And they had other responsibilities. And so it got to a point where, I just started going by myself, which is totally fine with me. But now to your question, when I come back, these people that I used to go out with are still friends of mine, and they're always curious and eager to find out what the trip was like. And, we'll get together and spread some maps out on a table and, look at some slides and photos, and that's cool. But, the bottom line is that these trips became kind of personal for me. And I guess maybe because I'm kind of a loner, I wasn't that eager to come back and tell everybody all the things that I did and show everybody photos and things like that. I mean, I'm certainly willing to do it if somebody's curious about it. But it was always fine with me that these trips were really just for me. It was kind of a way of getting away. I was fascinated by how much I was learning about myself when I was out there alone, how I was handling different situations, how I was making decisions, how I was making adjustments to different lifestyle, how I was handling emotions like fear and being cold and sleeping on the ground. And it's been a tremendous influence on me as a person. And that's why it became kind of a personal thing. And so when I came home, I was really happy to be back. Everybody said, well, you look great. You don't look like you spent the last month, in the middle of nowhere. You're smiling, you're happy. And that was really enough for me.
So what's been some of your, maybe just a couple of your favorite places?
Whoa. A lot of people ask me that, and I still don't have a standard answer.
Yeah.
Because every trip is different, as you probably know. And even if the trip is a bad trip, even if the trip, was all bad weather and hard hiking and all that, by the time you get home and, your muscles, heal up and the mosquito bites are gone, you tend to forget the negative and remember the good stuff. And so typically when people say, well, what's your favorite trip? I would say my most recent trip is my favorite trip.
It's a good answer.
But, as I look back, I don't know. I like Alaska. I've been to Gates of the Arctic, the big national park up there 3 different times on 3 different wild rivers, 3 different valleys. I also, because I have a degree in psychology and I'm a social scientist and I'm interested in different cultures and different people, and I built my business around that. But then I realized that I can combine that interest in people and culture with my interest in backpacking and going into really remote places. So I started to go into really remote places where I would find people such as, the Inuit or Eskimo people up north, or people living in Lapland, or people living the descendants of the Inca living up in the Andes Mountains, Aborigines in the Australian outback, and on and on. And so on some of my trips, what I do is I just plan a trip where I'll go and pick out a spot where they live, just point to a place on a map, and I just go and I show up, and the people there were going, who are you?
Wow.
What are you doing here? Where's the rest of your party? Why did you come here? And I tell them that I'm interested in their culture, and that before I left home, I did a lot of research. And so I'm aware of their history and their tradition and their religion and how they make a living and how they survive out there. what they eat for breakfast, everything. But I wanted to come and see it for myself. And they're like, so you came all the way out here just to see how we live? And I say, yeah. And they say, well, where are you coming from? I say, New York City. They go, what? You coming from New York City? I said, well, I'm just a curious guy with a credit card, and so I decided to come up here. And once they hear that, then they're like, it's like, wow, somebody was that interested in who we are and how we live that he came all the way out here by himself. We didn't even know anybody. And so then they're really happy to have you there and to have me there and to show me their lifestyle. And over the years, I've made some really good friends, Native Americans, First Nations people up in Canada, people all over the world who are living subsistence lifestyles or living off the grid. And, it's in a way, it's kind of sad because everybody tells me the same thing. They always say, our culture is really dying. The young people, they don't want to stay here. They don't want to learn the language. They don't want to learn the skills. They don't want to learn about our tradition. As soon as they get old enough, they want to leave. So, we're in a situation where our culture is on a decline. And so it's really cool to have somebody who's interested enough to come up here with no ulterior motive, with no nothing except curiosity, and who's up here just to see how we live. So it's great that I was able to combine those two things that I love and make trips like this.
Incredible, man. So you've done, dozens and dozens of these trips, but you're far from being over with these. What are some of the ones that really stick out to you for the future? What's some stuff on your bucket list that you're like, I cannot wait to get out there or meet these people or see that site?
Is QuickBooks slowing your business down? Do you have challenges managing inventory, project profitability, or just getting paid fast enough? Get your business to a better place and graduate to NetSuite today. Stop paying for multiple systems that don't give you the information you need when you need it. Ditch the spreadsheets and all the old software you've outgrown. Now is the time to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle, the world's #1 cloud business system. NetSuite gives you visibility and control over your financials, HR, inventory, e-commerce, and more. Everything you need, all in one place, instantaneously. Whether you're doing $1 million or hundreds of millions in revenue, save time and money with NetSuite.
Join the over 24,000 companies using NetSuite right now. Let NetSuite show you how they'll benefit your business with a free product tour at netsuite.com/info. Schedule your free product tour right now at netsuite.com/info, netsuite.com/info.
Yeah, well, actually right now, I'm doing research on 3 trips. One is to the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. The other one is to Los Glaciares down in Argentina in Patagonia. And the third one I'm researching now is in the high Atlas Mountains of Morocco, where the Berber people live. And so I haven't decided which one or ones that I'm going to do yet. I'll certainly be doing at least one of them, and hopefully 2 or maybe even 3. It's a lot of fun doing the research. It's a lot easier than it was, decades ago, because now we have, the internet and you can get so much information. I used to have to send, snail mail letters out to different national parks and to send away and find out how to get topo maps from different countries. I used to have to go to the library and look stuff up and go to museums and find out information. And so it was more painstaking to put a trip together. Now I can sit, right in front of my computer and get a lot of information, including trip reports from other people who have been there. I can download topo maps. It's a completely different thing now. Basically, I look at a map of the world and I say, where haven't you been lately?
Man, that's so cool. Golly. It's just such a neat concept of how to live your life. Work your tail off, build a business that allows you some freedom. Because, I agree with you. You said this earlier. Starting your own business can feel like you're not really working for yourself, but you're working for the company, your business that you started. It's just very hard to have the discipline to say, no, I'm stopping myself for this week or these 2 weeks or over this weekend even, and saying, I'm not going to do this. But man, if you got that discipline, you've got some other hobby that you can pour yourself into like this. What a great life. You know, to me, it's an adventure to be in New York City. So you got a year-round adventure, in my opinion.
Well, you know, it is tough to break away, or at least it used to be. You know, if you're running a business, you feel kind of guilty when you're about to walk away from it, you know, especially if you're going to be gone for weeks at a time, and you're not going to be able to be in touch with it, to talk to anybody, to see how things are going, to make any decisions. You know, you say to yourself, wow, you know, is this right? You know, somehow, you know, you feel a little like, you know, maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe something will happen while I'm gone and I should have been here. But, you know, I persevered. I said, you know what, if that's what happens, that's what happens, you know. But the last thing I want to do in life is to reach some old age and to sit back and say, boy, you know, I wish I had done this and I wish I had done that, and to regret, you know, opportunities that I had and didn't take because I decided to just stay home and work. And so now, you know, I'm still in business here. My company is now 44 years old. It didn't go out of business. You know, I had a great career. And the coolest thing about it, every year I did at least one long trip. I also did a bunch of weekend trips I still do that. But I never let the pull of business keep me from doing what I love and just getting out into the fresh air and spending a couple of weeks on my own.
And so, as a celebration of that lifestyle and of those stories and all your trips, you decided to write a book about it. Could you just tell us about that, like what it contains? Because I'd love for people to read your story, man. Just a great way to build a life.
Yeah, and actually, it's actually a cool book, although it's easy for me to say that.
Yeah. That's funny.
But so what I decided to do, the book has 9 chapters. I picked 9 trips of all the trips that I've taken based on, you know, where I was. I wanted sort of geographic dispersion. I wanted trips in different parts of the world. There were a couple of trips in there where I was with a friend. Most of them are solo, but it's kind of a cross section of trips. And it starts, each of the chapters is its own story. It's got a theme. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end. And so it's not about, you know, I woke up in the morning, I walked 13 miles, I made a camp by a river, I saw a full moon. You know, each chapter tells a story. Each chapter has its own point of view about something. Some of them are funny, some of them are tragic, some of them are suspenseful, some of them are insightful. And what I did is I arranged them in chronological order, starting in 1966, and then the last chapter was just a couple of years ago, just before the book was published. And so as you read from one chapter to another, you're not only getting an individual story for each of these trips, but you can begin to see other things as well. For example, you can begin to see how I, as a 20-year-old in 1966, how I've changed and how my attitude towards backpacking has changed, how my experience has come into play, and how my appreciation of the outdoors and respect for the wilderness has developed. At the same time, you read these chapters and you see how backpacking has changed and how the wilderness has changed, and how, you know, when the ultralight philosophy came in, and how technology like GPS and satellite phones, how that came in, how the different philosophies, you know, like leave no trace, how all that factored in. And so, in a sense, the book is a story about a city kid who spent his life 50 years doing wilderness trips, but it's also a story of 50 years of the wilderness all around the world, and where I was and what I saw and who I met and what I did. So it's called Way Out There, Adventures of a Wilderness Trekker. It's on sale at Amazon or any bookstore that you want. And I'd also say that if anybody's interested, they can go onto my website, which is jrinthewilderness.com. In addition to seeing a number of photos from all these trips and a list of all the trips that I did, There's more information about the book. In fact, there's a synopsis, a summary of each of the chapters. There are some photos in there from those chapters that are not in the book. I'm happy to say the book is doing very well. It was published by Mountaineers Press out in Seattle. And since it's been out there, I've been traveling around the country doing book signings and lectures. The other thing is that now that I'm where I am in terms of age and experience and what have you, and I think back to how it was for me growing up in a working class family in a big city. And so what I've been doing now for the last few years is going into some of the public schools here in New York City and some of the other cities around the country and talking to kids who, may not have the privileges and the economic situation that a lot of other kids have. And I try to encourage them to still reach for their dream, and to not be discouraged by how hard, their life may seem, and to not let anybody discourage them or tell them that there's anything that they can't do. Because I grew up that way. I was able to reach out and get what I wanted and live my dream. And so I would like for kids that grow up, in the city that are having it tough to know that there's a good life out there for them. If they really want it and if they try hard enough, that they can get it. And I do a little talk and talk is called, if I can do it, you can do it. And so that's kind of how I like to try to, pay back or give back or pay it forward or whatever, because the wilderness and the outdoors and being out there has really had a positive impact on me, both physically, mentally, and emotionally. And I'd like to see other kids have that opportunity as well. So I don't care what race or color they are or whatever. Anybody that's out there that's struggling, I like them to know that it can happen, that they should just hang tough and do what they have to do and believe that they can reach for whatever heights they want to get to.
Oh man, that's great advice. I was going to ask you for some parting words, but I think you just gave them to me right there. Mr. Harris, congratulations on a life built pursuing something that at first you did not want to do whatsoever. But thank God for parents that have
Yes.
A little more foresight than we do at 10, 12, 15 years old. You know what I'm saying?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so happy my parents did that. It was really a life changer, and for people who may not have parents or two parents or parents who know or to encourage their kids, it's still open for them as well. If what I do or what I say in some small way can maybe change their perspective or change their attitude, then, I can use this platform that writing a book has given me to go out there and try to talk to some kids about it, because it's really worth it. Again, I'm living a dream and I've been doing it all these years, and I'm so grateful that I can still do it. I would just, I'd like to see other people have that same opportunity.
Well, keep doing what you're doing, brother.
Okay, cuz.
Thank you so much for joining us, man. This was fantastic.
Well, I had a really pleasant time talking to you, Mason. Thanks a lot for asking me these questions. I really enjoyed it.
Good. Well, stay warm. Enjoy your next trek. Yeah, you've got some good ones you've done, so I got to follow in your footsteps. At least do some of them.
Okay, my man. Yeah, thanks again. This has really been great. I really enjoyed this.
Good. Well, have a good day.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot.
Yes, sir.
All right, have a good day.
Yes, sir. See ya.
Ciao.
First of all, thank you so much for listening. It means the world to us that you choose to listen to this show. If you'd like to help us further, you can leave a review on iTunes, share us with your friends, your family. It goes a long way to growing the show. You can also support us financially through patreon.com/adventuresportspodcast. Link is in the show notes. And also, if you have an idea of who could be a good guest for the show, we're always looking for people to tell their story about the outdoors or adventure. So if you know someone, please reach out. Email us at info@adventuresportspodcast.com. And until then, get out there and have some fun.
For the ones who know safety isn't a catchphrase, it's a culture. And the ones who help make sure everyone makes it home safe. For the safety-minded who watch everyone's backs, Grainger offers supplies and solutions for every industry, as well as safety assessments and training to keep your facilities safe and your people safer. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.